Thank you for joining us today for the virtual Sunday service with the Center for Creative Living. CCL, a charter of the Universal Church of the Master, has served and supported the spiritual needs of its community here in the Bay Area for over 20 years.
Good morning, and welcome to the Center for Creative Living. This is the Reverend Doti Boon. I'm so glad to have you here today. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, and you're part of our neighborhood. We have a lot of announcements of things that are coming up, but the one I want you to grab a pen and write down is the Light of Lights. Many of you have celebrated the Light of Life. I've got Light of Lives and Light of Lights, but it's the Light of Lights with the wonderful Center for Living with Dying. And you know our beautiful Reverend Janet Childs is one of the people that puts this on, and she's going to be singing and talking. We're going to have speakers. There's so many wonderful things. Now, right now, I don't know how to get a hold of the Zoom so you can be a part of this, but I'm going to find out. And if you want to find out more about December 9th from 7 to 9, and it's going to be virtual, Light of Lights, please contact Corky. Now that's Corky W at u-c-m.org. And she will help you with anything I talk about today as far as dates and scheduling goes. She is in charge of our scheduling, okay? Because I know that we're also going to be having a Christmas party with UCM. Our parent church is the Universal Church of the Master. And speaking of which, our speaker today is the Reverend Dr. Mary Garry, and she's this beautiful lady that comes and talks to us every once in a while, and she and her husband Tom are charters. And what I mean by that, they own a charter to the Universal Church of the Master, and theirs is called the Center for Infinite Growth. And many of you have heard of this before, or taken classes from Tom Garry, or been in church and listened to Mary Garry. The Garys are such a backbone to the Universal Church of the Master. So please stay tuned so that you can listen to our wonderful Mary. Now, as I go through here, and I'm going to be adding, so stay tuned after Mary has talked. I'm going to add a real-life experience that I had in the Battle of Los Angeles when we were attacked. And I'll tell you all about it. And that was all the way back to 1942. I know, I'm an old broad. Okay? And now we're going to have a message and a prayer. Stay tuned.
Well, good morning, everyone. This is Reverend Dr. Ayleen Augustine, and it is a pleasure to be here with you this morning. And it seems that, I mean, fall is my favorite season, and it seems as if we passed it up. It just, especially up here on the mountain, it seems to have gone straight into wintertime. So I hope everyone is staying well, staying healthy, staying warm, and really focusing on, being as healthy as you possibly can be. Now, I also know that as of tonight, Sunday, at 10 p.m., Santa Clara County, as well as 4 other counties, is going into a shutdown that will go until January 4th. And this can be tremendously frustrating, and I know that for many, Thanksgiving was a very hard time, and if it was a really hard time for you, I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to get much better anytime soon because of the surges that are happening. And there are some good signs on the horizon. We have vaccines that are being worked on, and, granted, it's not going to be an immediate thing, and it will probably into next year. So the hope, the sort of more conservative hope, is that by, say, the end of summer, beginning of fall in 2021, we may be able to, start getting back to, whatever the new normal is going to be. So we just have to kind of buckle in. We have to hold on. We have to keep being safe, including the use of masks. And unfortunately, for a time, we're going to have to stay put. Now, in my county, Santa Cruz County, they haven't initiated it yet, and it is expected to be brought into action probably sometime by mid next week. So hang in there. We just need to be able to kind of hold on to some of the things that maybe we wanted to do, and to take this time as an opportunity for reflection, for the ability to be able to, kind of have that quiet time. Because honestly, this is what winter was. And, and while the calendar may not say it's winter, it kind of has that feel. In the ancient times, that's what happened at this time of the year. Things got quiet. People went indoors. There was more interaction among the families, and there was less interaction with outside. And even though we are centuries beyond that, people are learning how to embrace that point of introspection again. So I encourage each and every one of you that, we can still have contact virtually, even if it's just phoning a friend, as Dottie spoke about last week, and being able to honor what it is that you're going through right now. Sometimes when we don't have distractions, that's when we can really get into what's going on inside of us. And I know for myself, sometimes I would use my distractions to keep me from dealing with myself. So maybe a part of the gift in this is that people will really be able to have that time to assess their own lives and to focus on what they need, rather than, just staying busy in order to stay 2 steps ahead of the things that are maybe troubling them a bit. Don't be afraid to face what it is that, maybe you're trying to stay too busy for. Because ultimately, it's not bigger than you. It is not stronger than you. And it's only scary when we don't look it head on. And always remember that you're not alone. And if you do need help, please reach out. Dottie provides her contact information. You can reach out to the Universal Church of the Master. And just know that there are people there who will help you and assist you through this process. So, take a nice deep breath in. And as you exhale, let anything weighing on your body, your mind, or your spirit just sort of fall aside into an imaginary little basket. And I've had people ask me about the basket and what it should look like. It should look like anything you want it to. You can imagine it in any way. One person said they imagined it as a wastebasket with one of the little flip lids. Or, you can imagine it any way you want. It's yours. And it's for those things that are weighing on you. Because in this place, in this moment, and in this space, you don't need to hold on to them. Dear, blessed, and wonderful Creator, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for our lives. We thank you for all the blessings you give in each and every moment and with each and every breath. We thank you for the blessing of, and ask that you bless all the members of this community and all the members of every community. We ask that each and every heart and each and every spirit feel your presence during this very difficult time. Some of us are really afraid, Creator, and we know that you are with us, and yet for some it's hard to feel you. Please make your presence known a little bit more strongly for them, because I know that if they could feel that love, that devotion, that parental protection that you provide, that loving acceptance, I know that they wouldn't be afraid. And I know they would realize that no matter what, between you and I and everybody else, we've got this. Thank you for allowing us to be there for one another. Thank you for the blessing of, and please bless all of those who are in grief, and our beloved Reverend Doti G and her beautiful daughter Courtney. May they find peace, because we know that Reverend Doti G is with you, and may her daughter always feel her love. Creator, we thank you for the blessing of all those who are out there, that even with the shutdown, they still have to go out there, who are at risk, who are spending their time and focusing their energies on taking care of others. Creator, may they be safe, as well as their families and loved ones. And may all understand that everything happens in your time, and that you answer the prayers in 3 ways. No, not yet, and I thought you'd never ask. So always allow us to remember that this is just not yet, and that one day we will all stand together as a community, joined in body as well as mind and spirit again. But until then, Creator, we know that we are connected through you, and we thank you for that. We thank you for treating each and every one of us like we are your favorite child. And Creator, whatever it means to you, we hope you have a wonderful day. For all your creation to the next 7 generations and beyond, Aho Matak Oyasin, Ago, 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 by earth, sea, and sky, Namaste, Shalom, Assalamu Alaikum, blessed be, Amen.
Good morning. I'm so glad that you have joined us this morning, and my name is Reverend Mary Garry. For those of you who don't know me, actually it's Reverend Mary Garry, even if you do know me. So, and I'm going to be talking to you today about what is tomorrow, the 79th anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But I want to have it integrated with some of the spiritual work that we have all been doing. And so let's go. Some people said, well, why would Mary Garry be giving that presentation? And I decided those were people who probably didn't know that Mary Garry has 11 of Winston Churchill's books, probably every book he ever authored, including one on painting, besides the 5 on the World War II. He did write one on the Civil War also. I have one floor of books in my house, not as many as here at the office, but one whole bookcase of this size full of books on World War II. I have always been very interested in World War II. I had personal experiences that I have remembered from that era. I was 80 2 weeks ago, and so I was around for World War II, but pretty young. And I don't remember a lot of things, but I do have a couple of memories that I'll inflict on you. And the final reason that I'm here doing the talk is that I don't know many people who can say no to Doti Boon and Corry Gott after all they have done to keep CCL viable during this very difficult time. And I think that's something we all want to help with. You're welcome. So let's take a look at what was going on in the United States just before December 7th. We had just begun to emerge from the worst depression economic depression the United States had ever had to deal with. Many, many people, probably at least 30% of Americans, were very strongly against joining what was then the war in Europe. Protestant ministers spoke from the pulpit, discouraging their members from joining the military. And survivors of World War I, both my grandfather, Tom's father, Many people who found World War I a terrible experience were even more strongly against having their sons go into battle in World War II. And for those of us in the East, the Bund, which is the German social clubs, were incredibly powerful and incredibly active and were hostile towards people who were resistant to the Bund's meetings and sayings. I'm turning my notes if you're wondering why I lift my finger regularly. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. We had missed the warning signs. We didn't recognize the planes as they came in. December 8th, we declared war against Japan. December 11th, Germany and Italy declared war against the United States. A joint agreement had been signed by the three powers before Japan had been at war anywhere except China, saying that if one was attacked or war was declared on one, the other two would come in, and they did. A lot of people, as I was growing up, said, I wonder if FDR knew, and he just wanted us to go to war, and so he didn't tell anybody. I don't think so, frankly. I don't think he would have risked as much as we lost in the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Most leaders of countries, allied countries as well as other countries, understood that the battle in the East, the Eastern community, it was an island battle. And to be successful there, you had to have effective airline carriers. And he just never would have put all the aircraft carriers at risk. And he was negotiating in what he believed at the time was good faith with Japanese people who were in Washington, D.C. at that time. Japanese Admiral Yamamoto was the admiral which had planned the attack on Pearl Harbor. He had also studied in the United States and had spoken very strongly in the war councils in Japan against going after the United States. And he said, the only way we would have a chance is if we took out all their aircraft carriers. But if the war lasts longer than a year, we'll lose. And when the planes returned to their ships after bombing Pearl Harbor, Admiral Yamamoto is said to have said, I hope we have not awakened a sleeping giant, but they had. Just as a point of information, the military was not ready to go to war. There was just not. In 1941, there were 1,620,000 people in the U.S. military. In 1944, there were 11,410,000 in the U.S. military. That tells you how much growing we had to do in 4 years. So, one of the things that Dottie had asked me to look at is what did the civilians do during World War II? And they did pretty much everything that had to be done in the United States. It was very impressive. In all towns, it was critical for coastal towns, but the government made it in all towns. At night, everybody had to either have their lights off or blackout curtains. And there were wardens assigned to walk around at night, and if you didn't have one or the other on, if you didn't have your curtains closed, you better close them. If you didn't have curtains, you better turn your lights off. That's just the way it was. Because what they had found is that the German U-boats who were off the coast of particularly the East Coast used the lights from the city to illuminate ships from the United States leaving the harbors at night, and they destroyed them. They bombed them or torpedoed them. And so we put up dark things. They still found some ships, and we had civilian spotters that facilitated rescue operations. Women took the factory jobs that directly supported the war effort. I'm sure all of you have seen the posters and even the coffee cups that say, Rosie the Riveter, items previously discarded were saved. They were called scrap drives, and children ran them often. And they were metal, rubber, and even the fat drippings were saved to make soap. We call it recycling now, but then it was to help the war effort. And I just need to say this, and I just need to move Kuan Yin onto the screen with me, is that one of the things that I think contributed to the war effort and the success of our engagement in the war is that the American citizens of Japanese origin moved peacefully to internment camps. Now, there was never any verified element of espionage or sabotage that was done by any Japanese American. And many of them were born here, but it didn't make any difference. They were moved inland to these terrible internment camps. If you have never been to the Japanese Museum in San Jose, California, they have recreated, and it's very interesting, they recreated a room that shows you the holes in the wall, the holes in the floor, that you could hear from room to room, and each family got a room, and they just went. And the number of Japanese that joined the war effort were sent to I think it's 104th Army Division, I'm not positive of the number, to fight the Germans, because they weren't allowed to fight the Japanese, was amazing. And it was a tribute to those people, and a shame on us for the war. And then there was rationing. Every person received a ration book, and parents were responsible for their children's ration books, and stamps arrived monthly to update what you could get with your ration book. The food rationing was sugar, coffee, butter, meat, canned foods, cheese, butter. I don't know how many of you remember, but I remember as a little girl, they had these funny little yellow things in a packet of what looked like lard to me, and you had to break that packet and squeeze that orange all through the butter, the lard, so that it looked like butter. Everybody knew what it was and wasn't, but that's what we had to do, and that's what we did. Victory gardens. Every open space, even in some cities' rooftops, were used for growing vegetables. And if you wanted vegetables, that's how you got them. And if you wanted them in the winter, you canned them, and you canned them in glass, because all canned foods went to the troops. Nobody complained about that. Or they may have complained. How can I say that nobody complained? But generally speaking, there was not an outcry against that by American citizens. I remember Victory Gardens, and we continued Victory Gardens, quote, after the war was over. So I remember them very well. And canning. Ball, the people who made the jars you can in, their growth was huge. Pardon?
Mason jars?
Yes, mason jars. Thanks, Corky. She's here to keep me technically alive. Non-food rationing, rubber, gasoline, fuel oil, bicycles. You couldn't drive much, so everybody wanted a bicycle. The president, FDR was president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, asked citizens to turn in old raincoats and rubber shoes and hoses, reminded people that one old shovel could make 4 grenades. Americans were involved. They wanted to do things to make the program work, to give every support they could to the military, because the military was their sons. Occasionally their daughters, but in those days primarily their sons. Victory speed, if you did drive your car, was 35 miles an hour. Can you imagine how the people would be objecting to that in these days? No social driving. So I decided to take a little harder look at rationing. The things that were tightly controlled were gasoline. 3 gallons a week. That's all you got. You didn't go far. Most people took the bus or the train to work, or they certainly carpooled everywhere they went. Meat was very heavily rationed. Clothes, some things just couldn't be manufactured anymore. The government passed a law that says if we, the government, say you're going to switch your product to a military product, you have to. That's it. No discussion. And so they couldn't build kitchen appliances, durable personal goods. Nobody built a refrigerator or a stove or any of those things. So you better take care of what you had. And no new housing was to be built. Even when, due to the increase in manufacturing, people moved from small towns or to the farms into the cities or into the areas where the industry was growing, and they just had to double up. I mean, they simply didn't build new housing for people to be accommodated in. Many economic controls were put into place. There were price controls, there were wage controls. Taxes were raised significantly. Some people didn't like it, but actually, post-Depression, many folks were making more money than they were before, and they had less places to spend it, less things to spend it on, so there wasn't a big fuss. Most people used their extra money to buy war bonds. Now, you bought war bonds, the savings rate was 25%. Pretty good. What happened is you bought the $100 war bond for $75, and when you cashed it in, future date, after the war, when the country was back on its feet, you'd get $100 back. So everybody bought war bonds. The most you could buy in one day was $50,000. And Babe Ruth, in New York, wasn't able to get into the military. He wasn't exactly in tip-top military shape. So one day he bought $50,000, and the next day he bought another $50,000 because he wanted to do his part for America. So what was the people power like here in the United States? Well, the manpower was in the military. That's just the way it was. If you were a healthy man, you were part of troops on the ground. If you were older, you had some minor health problem, you might be in a backup office. But if most of the men in America of military age were in the military. The women power, which there was a lot of in the United States, were in the factories. And older people and children worked the victory gardens. They gathered all sorts of scrap metal. There was always a drive going on, scrap metal, hoses, whatever it was. The government, FDR mostly, but he was a pretty astute motivator. He had a lot of skills in that area. And so he always had something going on that you could do to help the war drive. And I thought it was interesting, and I didn't remember it from earlier readings, that German prisoners of war who had been brought to America were taken out to work on farms where there were no men because they were in either manufacturing or the military there to do the crops. And so the German prisoners of war and some Italian prisoners of war worked the land, and the food went for the military. We declared war on Japan after Pearl Harbor. Germany and Italy declared war on the United States 11 days after that. That was from that pact that I mentioned before they had signed. The United States moved primarily to the European war, and these aren't my books, but I have a lot of books on it, and one of the things that I think influenced it was the relationship that Churchill had with FDR. He had kept him advised of every step of the European war and pressed him for resources before the Germans declared war on us, and then the partnership was great. afterwards. Germany at that time was consuming Europe, just consuming it. And frankly, we had to rebuild aircraft carriers before we could be an effective presence in the war on Japan. Now, that didn't mean we didn't fight and that we didn't take back certain islands that were fringe islands that we could manage. And it certainly did, a lot of people heard of the bombers that bombed Tokyo and then flew into China and were hid by Chinese people who were attempting to resist the Japanese. But primarily, the American GIs poured into Europe. Britain first, air raids, and from there into Europe and especially Germany. The Russians held at Stalingrad. I mean, there's a whole story about how Russia and Germany had a pact, and then, of course, the Germans broke it because they didn't care about those Germans. Nazi Germans, not my friendly Germans. The Russians held at Stalingrad and began to push the Germans back. And the U.S. and Britain went on the ground in Italy from Africa. And then there was the D-Day invasion, in which thousands and thousands of American and British, primarily, lives were lost on the beaches. But they made the foothold and they began to take back European soil. We pushed into Germany, and as we pushed into Germany, the Holocaust camps were discovered and liberated. And then there was Hitler's suicide, and Germany then surrendered. And then Germany and Italy surrendered. And then the focus fully moved to Asia and southeastern islands. There weren't very many Japanese prisoners of war. Said Kuan Yin. It was a hard time for her, I'm sure. They were expected to fight to the death and not surrender. They developed kamikaze planes. The pilot had his funeral service before flying and was expected to dive his plane into ships, primarily aircraft carriers. They had not enough fuel to return to their base. If they didn't do it, they'd just crash into the ocean. Because of their belief system, they had no respect for surrendering Americans, and their horror stories on the Bataan March, and then the treatment that prisoners received in Japan itself. And in fact, the American prisoners were told and understood full well that the first time an American attacking military put a foot on Japanese soil, all American prisoners of war would be killed. We began to, we began to win the islands, taking island after island back. But the casualties were huge, just huge. So then they said, what will it take to invade Japan? They thought that 500,000 to 1 million Allied forces, primarily U.S., Britain, and Australian, would be killed. The Japanese citizens were told to prepare to fight to the death. The citizens, men, women, and children, and they were training with sharpened bamboo sticks. And the estimates there by the Japanese were 10 to 20 million would die in a land invasion. So the world-changing decision was made to use the atom bomb. Japanese citizen deaths attributed to the two bombs are estimated between 129,000 and 226,000. It's terrible numbers and a terrible experience. But if you look at the potential loss even to Japanese lives, I can understand why a war decision was made like that. But I think what it would be now, should we have a a war that included those kind of bombs. Well, what was the cost of the war in Japan and Germany? And World War II was the deadliest international conflict in history, taking the lives of 60 to 80 million people. Civilians made up an estimated 50 to 55 million deaths from the war. Military comprised 21 to 25 million of those lost during the war. 6 million Jews died at the hand of the Nazis during the Holocaust. Millions more were injured. And still more lost their homes, everything they owned, all of their property. Unknown, this now is not from all my history books on the shelf. This is Mary, the minister and wife of Tom, who lives his talk, and said how glad he was he never had to go to war. People like Jim Marnie Pettix, who talked to you about what war does to him, and I thought there's just untold numbers of individuals who had their humanity scarred by the things they had to do and saw during the war. They became probably much less than their higher self wanted them to be in those days. So, war was over. We decided war doesn't work. So we all got along. The country stayed happy. Everybody loved everybody. What about the Vietnam War? The people, the draft age men, and had to escape into Canada. Do Black Lives matter? How about the divisions that we're facing now? History has shown we can recover together. Sometimes that recovery is to move against a greater challenge. Could that be COVID? And I wrote this before the numbers of this week. Oof. So, what should we do? What should we do? Well, first, I think we have to remember that the earth is our training ground. It's our college or high school or our place to learn our lessons. We have to remember that we can't just observe our lessons. We have to make a contribution to the solution. And a friend of mine said, what I always try to do is to say, what am I supposed to be learning from this experience? And I say it over and over until it becomes clear to me. Now, it's not just some terrible experience. It may well be that. But I say, what am I supposed to be learning from it so it doesn't recur? One of the things that's hard to remember, for me anyway, is that everyone is here for their own lesson. And their own lesson may not look like my lesson. And so, Mary, they may not think like you, but it's what they have to do. They say it's easier and shorter to learn here. I hate to think what learning is like over there. But what if we created a future based on goodwill and love rather than fear and hatred? What if we focused on that quiet voice we can hardly hear? Focused and focused, because it might tell us what to do in the specific circumstance. Bless you all. And let's listen together for that higher voice and create a plan to follow through on our intentions. Because if we don't have a plan to follow through on our intentions, it's really hard. I'm going to close now. I often open this way, and I can't sing because Janet's not here to keep me on tune, and because we can't disobey any, it's not copyright laws. But I would say to you, don't let anyone try and tell you that you're anything less than beautiful, that you are anything less than whole. For your loving is a miracle. How deeply you're connected to my soul. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Mary Garry. That was a wonderful look at history and a look at what was happening. Many of you just read about it in the history books, but I actually was a part of what was going on during that time. For those of you who are interested in a little bit of history you've probably never heard before, go online and look up the Battle of Los Angeles or the War of Los Angeles. Because during the time right after we had declared war on December 8th, we were at war with Japan. And what happened is that February 24th, there was a huge explosion in Culver City, California, where I lived. My grandfather was an air raid warden, and what that meant is he dressed all in white. He had this wonderful metal triangle on a post that made a loud racket when he hit it with a metal bar. And he would go out there if he felt anything negative was happening in the neighborhood and ring it. And then he'd march around and say, put out that candle, turn off that radio, the Japanese can see that radio light. And he was very in his authority. First time in his life I think he ever had any authority. And one night, after my grandma and I had gone to bed, I was awakened by this loud noise. My grandfather was clanging that triangle, and you could hear, it sounded like firecrackers, but it was anti-aircraft guns going off. I ran to the front door. My grandma and I peered out, and my grandfather said, stay inside. We're under battle with the Japanese. Well, we didn't, of course. We snuck out. And everywhere, there were searchlights going across the dark sky. There were anti-aircraft guns going off from it seemed like every hillside. And the whole sky was illuminated. And there was a weird shape floating across the evening sky. This was 2 o'clock in the morning. And as we watched it, we really believed we were under attack. Many people got hurt. Some people got killed by the panic, by the sheer fear of what was happening. But it also added impetus to what had happened earlier. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had made a declaration, an executive declaration, that people of Japanese descent in the United States, and particularly on the West Coast, should be all rounded up and interned. Most of you have heard of Manzanar, one of the biggest camps that we have, that we think of when we think of the internment, but there were many camps. And at that time, it felt like the thing to do to protect everybody. Hindsight is pretty good. We look back going, how in the heck could we have had that happen? But it did. And I can remember that summer, I was in the car and my mother was driving me to kindergarten. And I said, Mom, where are all the flowers? All of the nurseries, all of the flower fields were gone because they were mainly either owned, operated, or ranched by people of Japanese descent, and there were no more flowers. And my mother said, Dottie, I don't know what happened. People don't realize our Japanese neighbors were picked up and taken away, and we had no idea what had happened. So what I'm saying, it's very interesting to read about what happened, but when you're actually there, even like I was as a small child, so scared that we were being attacked. Since then, they have said there was no attack by the Japanese. They've said that we were under attack by aliens. There's been so much weird media about the War of Los Angeles, or the Battle of Los Angeles in 1942. I suggest you read it. And it's a little bit of a part that you can put into any conversation when they're talking about what was happening on the 8th after we declared war. What was happening if you're a citizen of the United States, and particularly if you were born in California. Thank you.
Hold on to the awakening dawn. Reach into the heart of the rising sun. Embrace the knowing that we are all one, and beyond the path you're on. Ooh, you are a lighthouse in the midst of the storm. You carry the memory, both beautiful and torn. You fought for justice. You entered the battle of war. Time to reunite together on this healing shore, on this healing shore. Stay the course through turmoil and strife. Stretch to the ground and reach to the sky. Oh no, we may not know the answers why. We are here in this moment of life. You are a lighthouse in the midst of the storm. You carry the memory, both beautiful and torn. You fight for justice, and you entered the battle and the war. Time to reunite together on the healing shore. Hold on to the awakening dawn. Reach into the heart of the rising sun. Embrace the knowing that we are all beyond the path you're on. Ooh, you are a lighthouse in the midst of the storm. You carry the memory, both beautiful and torn. You fight for justice, and you entered the battle and the war. Time to reunite together on the healing shore. On the healing shore.
Thank you for joining us for this celebration of faith and fellowship. We'll be back next Sunday, and for those of you, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can leave them in the comments section. If you appreciate this video and the work that the Center for Creative Living is doing, please press like on the video. You can share the video, and also please subscribe, because that will help this community and the church grow. Remember, in these difficult and challenging times, the opportunity to give and support an organization that has done so much for the community is tremendously important. Please help the Center for Creative Living continue in the wonderful work that it does. We will make it through this. We will be stronger for it. Our faith will carry us. Be blessed, be safe, and have a wonderful week.